It's an avalanche. It's like an earthquake, what happened in Syria. This is going to be extremely consequential.
With the emergence of this new Islamically inclined government in Syria, what is the potential of seeing an Islamic government in this context?
I'm very hopeful. I'm very optimistic that this is the beginning of something good, inshallah.
People are speaking about voting being incorporated into the governance of Syria.
Why are we considering this foreign? This is part and parcel of our righteous governance, to consult to the people. Given their reality, did they do what they could to consult to the people? Yes, they did. Why are we calling it democracy when it is simply Islamic?
But would you say that Muslims are guilty of over-romanticizing the concept of a Khilafah?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, the idea here is our Khulafa were human beings. Mm-hmm. They were not infallible. Some of them were wicked.
Today we are joined with Shaykh Dr. Hatem Al Haj, who is one of the most prominent Islamic scholars in the Western world. Known for his expertise in comparative fiqh and contemporary Islamic legal issues, he holds a PhD in Islamic law and a master's in Islamic jurisprudence. In addition to his Islamic expertise, he's also a board-certified and practicing pediatric hospitalist. He currently sits as a senior member of the Fatwa Committee at AMJA, the Assembly of Muslim Jurists of America. Dr. Hatem continues to be a guiding force for Muslims navigating modern challenges while upholding Islamic principles in the West. Coming out of New Jersey, it's an honor to have Dr. Hatem Al Haj with us here today in our studio at OnePath Network. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's my honor. I'm very familiar with your work. May Allah bless you and bless this effort and make it for the benefit of the Ummah.
Ameen. I have to say that the Muslims of Sydney, Australia particularly, are very honored to have your presence, and we here at OnePath are also very privileged to have you here join us today, inshallah, on what will be, I hope, a very enlightening and beneficial discussion and conversation.
Ameen. I hope so.
Ameen.
Before we begin the podcast, a quick message from our sponsor. If you're Muslim and you care about your money, download this right now. The Halal Money app. An incredibly well-designed and easy-to-use financial app that allows you to open an account, deposit money, and spend through a Visa debit card they give you to use in your everyday transactions, away from the hands of a bank that's reveling in interest and even using your money in haram places. Download it now. Let's get back to the podcast.
So just to begin the conversation, we do have a few icebreakers. If you don't mind, I'm happy to ask those questions. I'll go straight ahead. As someone who is a pediatric hospitalist, and an Islamic scholar, what is the single biggest benefit you have gained from being a pediatric hospitalist towards being an Islamic scholar? The single greatest benefit?
Patience.
Wow.
I think dealing with children, you need to have a lot of patience to deal with kids. Kids do not basically communicate their complaints or like adults, so you will have to have patience to figure out the problem, and to also deal with a child. A child who doesn't want to be with you, doesn't want to be in the office, or doesn't want to be in the hospital. So you have to have patience to deal with a child, figure out their problem, and treat them. So I think patience is something that we do need, all of us need in our lives in general, but particularly dua, they need a lot of patience.
MashaAllah.
That's why the Prophet ﷺ said that Allah had not sent any prophet except that he tended to sheep, or that he was a shepherd at some point, and that's to basically be able to earn that quality of patience.
MashaAllah. Beautiful answer. Off the back of that, have there been any wisdoms or realizations you've had within Islam that were only possible through your work as a pediatric hospitalist? Wisdom, something you've uncovered in Islam through your, expertise in medicine?
Well, certainly medicine, you're dealing with life and death all the time. Mm-hmm. So I think that this makes you more acutely aware of the nature of life, and you do see people. And I was talking yesterday about how people dry out over time. You're born, I deal with newborns. You're born with about 75% of your body weight in water. And when you die, like if you die in your old age, you have about 55 to 60%, sometimes less, of your body weight in water. So you simply dry out, as the ayat talk about. اعلموا انما الحياة الدنيا لعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته ثم يهيج فتراه مصفرا ثم يكون حطاما. So لعب ولهو وزينة وتفاخر بينكم وتكاثر في الأموال والأولاد كمثل غيث أعجب الكفار نباته ثم يهيج فتراه مصفرا ثم يكون حطاما. The likeness of this life is like, the vegetations, the leaves of a tree. You see them lush and green, and then they become yellow, dry out, crumble away. You do see this in your patients. You do see this, like you see the difference between, a baby that lush and green, and old age, and we all then crumble away and turn into dust. So dealing with life and death on a daily basis certainly is sobering.
SubhanAllah. I could imagine that. You learn about the fragility of life when you see life and death every single day. Moving to the next part of your life, the jurist side of your life. I'm going to ask this question in two different frames. You can answer whichever one you want. What's one thing that is halal that most people think is haram? Or if you can't think of that, what is one thing that is haram that most people think is halal as a jurist?
That's an interesting question. Well, if you're talking about my experience as a physician, I think there are many treatments that people consider to be haram, or people are unaware that, for instance, impurities are allowable in medications. So sometimes they can be a little bit too strict, and certainly they are not allowed in certain madhab. So it's not allowable to use impurities in the Maliki and the Hanbali madhab. There are lots of details here. But the Hanafis and Shafi'is allow a lot of impurities to be used in treatment and in medical intervention. And so I think that this is one of the things where Muslims could be a little bit more stricter than they need to be when it comes to the different types of impurities. And also even, dog impurities. There is like a spectrum, and there are certain things that people need to realize to be able to handle these things without too much panic. So that's in terms of, what people believe to be haram when it is not necessarily haram. And like I said, it's hard to say that people believe something to be haram when there is basically nobody who said it's haram ever. It's usually matters of disagreement. But we say that al-marad madhinnat al-tarakhus, when people are sick, dispensations are warranted in hardship. Al-mashaqqa tajlib al-taysir, hardship begets or brings or warrants concessions and dispensations. So I usually talk to people about the dispensations of disease, and that's something that many people are unaware of. In terms of what people think is halal and it is actually haram, I'm blanking out on this.
I think there'll be many, but they'll come to us inshallah throughout the course of the conversation. Last question in this regard. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to grant you another lifetime and you weren't allowed to be a pediatrician or an Islamic scholar, what would you choose to be?
Well, when I finished high school, I wanted to study Sharia, and because at that time, Azhar in Egypt, I grew up in Egypt. I was born in Egypt and I grew up in Egypt. At that time, we were not particularly fond of Al-Azhar as an institution. Afterwards, I sent all of my children to Al-Azhar, from K to 12. But at that time, we felt that there is too much government control. So I wanted to study Sharia outside of Al-Azhar. If if I were to go back in time, I would study in Al-Azhar. But anyway, my mother refused. So the next best sort of field of study was Arabic, because I was already involved in da'wah at that time when I finished high school. So I wanted to study Arabic, and my mother refused. She insisted I study medicine. So we reached a compromise, and I was studying medicine during the day, and then there was like an institute where after hours, that I studied, continued my Sharia studies at. So we reached the compromise. So if we were to go back in time, and my mother, rahimahullah, may Allah bestow mercy on her, if she were to agree, I would study Arabic.
MashaAllah. To become a linguist, perhaps.
Yeah.
In the Arabic language, MashaAllah. So you grew up in Egypt, I believe? Yes. MashaAllah. Mm-hmm. I want to move on to our first, perhaps, major topic. In the last few months, I would say December to be exact, we have seen perhaps one of the biggest shifts in the Arab Muslim world with the success of the Syrian revolution, whereby one of the worst dictators of perhaps the modern era was toppled by an Islamically inclined movement. On saying this, especially with the emergence of this new Islamically inclined government in Syria, what is the potential of seeing an Islamic government in this context? And if so, what would that look like?
So this is certainly a huge question.
It's a huge question that would require ijtihad and much expertise.
It's an avalanche. Mm-hmm. It's like an earthquake. What happened in Syria? This is going to be extremely consequential. Mm-hmm. We hope, inshallah, that it will be in the best interest of the Ummah, Syria first, and then the region and the entire Ummah. And I'm very hopeful. I'm very optimistic. That this is the beginning of something good, inshallah, to be realized. But it will take time, and it will take effort, and it will take honest discourse, societal discourse, scholarly discourse, and societal discourse to basically figure out what Islamic governance in the 21st century or in our current era would look like. So there is always the hukm and the waqa, there are always rulings, and there's the, environment in which the rulings are meant to operate, and there is always a dialectic between the two that we have to consider. This has been going on since the time of the Sahaba. There was always this dialectic between the reality and the rulings. And scholars that are well-grounded in Sharia, they are not only looking at the furu', they are not only looking at the detailed rulings in the fiqh books, but they understand the qawa'id, the sort of the principles and the legal theory and the maqasid and the objectives of Sharia. They pay attention to what we call manatat, which are basically the effective causes of those rulings. Sometimes the manatat or the legal reasons or effective causes of the rulings change with the change of time. Mm-hmm. And that's when we talk about change of fatwa, we're not talking about the change of the divine address that never changes. Khitab al-ilahi never changes. Ahkam Allah, they don't change. But the manatat or the reasons of these ahkam may change with the change of circumstances. So change of fatwa with the change of times and places. It's not about the time or place, because the deen is meant to be valid until the day of judgment. It's about different circumstances, different conditions and circumstances. So the manatat change with the change of circumstances and conditions. And certainly our world has changed so much in the last 200 or 300 years, changed so much. And we need to figure out what do we mean by Islamic governance. Mm-hmm. What would that look like? Would that be like Harun al-Rashid, for instance, in Baghdad? Certainly we aspire to like an Umari Khilafah. Mm-hmm. But what would, like if you're talking about a Umari Khilafah, are you talking about the very exact sort of procedures that Umar radiallahu anhu followed the very exact structure of governance that Umar radiallahu anhu had. You're going to have the same dawaween that Umar radiallahu anhu had, or ministries. Of course not. So it is about the objectives and the principles, and it's about the substance, of righteous governance that we aspire to have. We aspire for like a Omari governance in that sense, not in the sense that we will transplant the same type of governance, but the principle of justice and irfaq also, which be basically kindness to the poor and so on. These principles are the ones that we will be looking to realize in an environment that is completely different, in a reality that is completely different. So this will require a lot of work on the part of the scholars to figure out what this will look like in this reality in our times. But certainly the discourse should begin, people should also temper their sort of expectations. People should give them time. People should understand that these things don't happen overnight, and allow for time, and allow for also this dialectic between different elements of the society. People have different backgrounds, so that eventually at some point, and I hope in the near future, not too far away, I hope in the near future we will see something good, something great come out of it.
So I guess it necessitates that we have some form of optimism in this regard. But would you say that Muslims are guilty of over-romanticizing the concept of a khilafah, so much to the point that it has become beyond our reach, perhaps?
Yeah, absolutely. Like the idea here is, some people are fixate on the form and not the substance. So the khilafah as in الخلافة العباسية, or الخلافة الأموية, or الخلافة العثمانية. So some people think that we may go back to the time of Harun al-Rashid, and certainly they, I've said this often, that they romanticize the concept of khilafah, or whatever it is that we had during the time of those khulafa. And certainly we don't need to bash our history. We don't need to be too self-critical, because during those times also you were not having, like, people in general around them were not having righteous governance. We're not having Omari governance, whether they were in China or in Europe. It wasn't that we were the only people who had to some extent tyrannical systems, because the Khalifa, if we're talking about the Khalifa and all of the Muslims who reminisce about the Khilafah, the Khalifa was a dictator to a great extent. So Harun al-Rashid, he didn't really have to go by the consult of the people, or he didn't listen to his counselors. He didn't have a parliament. He had control over Bayt al-Mal. He made his own decisions. He did not consult, or whenever he consulted, he didn't need to listen to the consultants. So is this what we want? I mean, this is what we complain about nowadays, but this is likely not what we want. So we have to be fair. We have to understand that there were many positives, but again, the ideal is, we did not have this ideal khilafah since the end of Al-Khilafah Al-Rashida. Even during the time of Al-Khilafah Al-Rashida, there were issues and there were problems. Certainly, the credibility of the Sahaba is something we Ahl Sunnah have to uphold. That's the sort of the litmus paper test for Sunnism is that we believe in the credibility of the Sahaba. That does not mean the infallibility of the Sahaba. It means the credibility of the generation, the goodness of this generation. And sometimes they had, so Al-Ahd al-Umariyya, for instance. Are we required to go back to Al-Ahd al-Umariyya? And if you compare between Al-Ahd al-Umariyya and the Wathiqat al-Madina, or the Constitution of Medina, if you may call it that. And the Constitution of Medina, by the way, Shaykh Dr. Akram Diya al-Umari, he used to be a great muhaddith, a great hadith scholar. And he said that he doesn't have any doubt that it is, despite the discussion about the chain of narration, and but he said that even the language, he doesn't have any doubt that this is genuine, and this was written during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, because even the language is not is the language of that time, not subsequent eras. So do you see differences between the Wathiqa of Al-Madina and Al-Ahd al-Umariyya? You can recognize differences between Wathiqat al-Madina and Al-Ahd al-Umariyya. So if we were to go back and choose one, we may want to choose Wathiqat al-Madina over Al-Ahd al-Umariyya. So even during the time of the Sahaba Ridwanullahi alayhim, the ultimate, source of guidance for us is still the Quran and the Sunnah. Yes, the Sahaba, that generation, and I was talking earlier this morning about the difference between Islam and other religions, is that we have basically the implementation of the Quran and Sunnah. The generation, that righteous first generation, they lived by the Quran and Sunnah. So we have, a living role model in that generation. But still, we will want to go back and figure out what is most consistent, with the Quran and the Sunnah, and then applicable also in the realities that we live in, because look at this example I use. I mention this quite often. When Umar radiallahu anhu saw that Muslims now live in, so instead of being all in Medina or all in one town, or they have moved out, and some Qurashis are now living in Egypt, some are living in Kufa, in Basra, in Sham, and so on. So if you kill someone by mistake and you have to pay the diya, who's responsible for the diya? The aqila, that's the paternal kin. So how long would it take, if this person who killed, someone by mistake lives now in Al-Fustat, or Egypt, so somewhere in Egypt, Alexandria. If you live in Alexandria, Egypt, how long would it take? And then the rest of your family members, some of them are in Yemen and some of them are in Kufa. How long would it take to collect the diya? And would that be fair to the victim? So Umar decided that the diya will not be collected from the paternal kin, but rather collected from the people in the same registry. Ahl al-Diwan, people in the same registry. Isn't that negotiating with the reality? Yeah, I think that this is negotiating with the reality, because if you insist that it is to be taken, that will be unfair to the victim's family.
Okay. No, mashallah, that's a very deep answer, tabarakallah. I guess it requires much ijtihad. It requires the scholars to sit down, discuss the topic. Could it potentially incorporate some elements of a democratic system? Of a democratic system, for instance, people are speaking about voting being incorporated into the governance of Syria. Is that something which the Islamic model has room and scope for?
So for a very long time, I used to say, I wouldn't like to use the word democracy per se, although the concept itself is an Islamic concept. the concept of, majority rule is an Islamic concept. So why did Umar radiallahu anhu add Abdullah ibn Umar to the 6 people that, although he clearly stated that Abdullah would not be chosen as a Khalifa, but he added him to break the tie. What is that? It's called majority rule. What did Abdurrahman ibn Auf do to select Uthman ibn Affan? He went out and he knocked on doors. He asked, the young girls in their homes, which one do you want for a Khalifa? If they wanted to have an election, could they have done it? Of course not. If you want to wait for people to, you have to collect all the sort of the ballot boxes from El Yamama and from El Bahrain and from this and from that. That will take a couple of years.
Impractical.
It was completely impractical. But did they do what they could? Given their reality, did they do what they could to consult the people? Yes, they did. He went out and he knocked on doors and he asked everyone. And like I said, the majority rule. And Umar radiallahu anhu, reminded us that if someone gives a bay'ah to another one without consulting the Muslims, then they should not be given support, lest they be both killed. So he was very severe in warning against going against this sort of tyrannical rule or military coups and things of that nature. So why are we considering this foreign? We've done this before, before anybody else. Maybe not before Greece, but this is part and parcel of our righteous governance to consult the people. And sometimes it clearly majority rule, break the tie, add Abdullah ibn Umar to the 6 people, so that if they disagree 3 and 3, he will be the one to break the tie. Now, why am I having? Why don't I call it democracy? Yes, these are sort of democratic principles, but we have the word shura. So when you call it democracy, the people who coined the term may always have the upper hand to tell you, no, you're not democratic,
Because it means X, Y, Z.
Because democracy means, no, this is, a genuine Islamic system, majority rule, transition of power, separation of different powers within, the branches of government. Shurah and Ali radiallahu anhu, the judiciary being separate from the executive branch, the judiciary having the upper hand, in the example of Shurah and Ali radiallahu anhu. So why are we calling it democracy when it is simply Islamic? Majority rule, peaceful transition of power, separation of powers, all of these things. If someone calls it democracy, I'm not, no problem. I mean, call it democracy. The reason why I prefer to call it a Shuri system of governance is that it is really, genuinely ours.
SubhanAllah. I think people are very defensive over such terms, but when it comes to the real life application, once you unpack what they actually mean, we find that we have something in our own tradition. I love how you said the word shura. Let's use perhaps our own terminologies when we discuss these concepts.
And then we can have all the fiqhi disagreements over whether shura is mu'lima or mulzima. Shura is simply informative or binding on the there is a disagreement, and the majority may have at one point said the shura mu'lima. It's not binding, and we can have a synthesis, and I love synthesis. We can have a synthesis. Is a shura always mulzima even nowadays? to the executive branch? No, it's not. It's not always binding. Sometimes you can have like the sort of presidential executive orders, and so there could be a synthesis, but mainly we will make it binding because the Quran says وَشَوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, consult them, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُم. We have an entire chapter in the Quran called Shurah. What else do you want?
The barakah of following the Shurah.
Yes,
as well.
وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُم. Their affairs are conducted on the basis of mutual consultation. وَشَوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Consult them in their affairs. So this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the fuqaha may have disagreed over whether it's binding or not binding. That's a separate discussion. But we can have a synthesis. We can have an appropriate synthesis that is respectful of the tradition, that is basically committed to the revelation, respectful of the tradition, and sensitive to our realities.
Yeah, that's an amazing way to put it. Under this branch of Islamic governance, there's also been a lot of hysteria surrounding the rights of minorities. I've heard some people, especially online, hysterically proclaim the rights of Christians are now in jeopardy because of this Islamic government. What do the rights of minorities look like under an Islamic government in this new age, in a modern age?
Okay, so when we first started the discussion, I talked about وثيقة المدينة and العهد العمرية. During our history, we don't have to defend our history. We are completely committed to defending the revelation. Our history is still human. Our khulafa were human beings. They were not infallible. Some of them were wicked. Some of our khulafa were wicked. I don't shy away from saying this, and I can prove it. So we go back to Wathiqat al-Madina. We go back to the Medina during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Did they not have Jews in the Medina during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? How did they fare during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Yes, certainly. When they violated the agreements, when they committed to treachery, they had to be removed. Those of them who did that, they had to be removed from Medina. But before they did that, how did they live in Medina? Before they committed treachery, and before they tried to kill the Prophet ﷺ, and before they reached out to the enemies outside of the Medina. Isn't this is called treason? This is, so before they committed treason, how did they live? On what terms did they live in Medina? And what did the Prophet ﷺ force on them? They just lived a normal life. They had equal rights. Based on Wathiqat al-Madina, they had equal rights. We have a system throughout our history. We have a system whereby they were able to conduct their affairs according to their Sharia. So maybe it will need to be adapted, maybe it will need to be modified, but look at how tolerant we were, allowing them to conduct their affairs according to their Sharia. They had their own courts. Like in Egypt, I was talking about this the other day. In Egypt, some of the one of the reasons people convert from Christianity to Islam in Egypt, and it's not like a big, it's not phenomenal, but there are conversions. There are conversions from Christianity to Islam in Egypt, but some of these are women who want to get a divorce because that's the only way they can get a divorce, because otherwise they'll have to go to their court. We still have this. It's still there. It used to be there throughout the Ottoman period. We have this in Majalis al-Milliyya. These are separate courts that administer their own sort of laws. So if she takes her Christian husband to their court, she will never get a divorce. So some of them convert just to get a divorce. So minorities will have their rights, and people, and certainly this would be controversial, and I'm quite sure, like some of your, part of your audience will be quite shocked, but the idea of Al-Jizya itself.
I was going to ask about it. I didn't know if it was too controversial to bring up, but since
Yeah,
you're going there.
no, that's fine. We have to discuss everything. We're not ashamed of anything in our tradition, but we have to discuss things with credibility, integrity, and also sensitivity to our current realities. So the idea of Al-Jizya, for instance, so many of our scholars said that all of our countries have been occupied by European forces. So there is a new contract now, a new social contract after the liberation of our countries from European, colonialism. There is a new social contract. So we Muslims and Christians in Egypt, and you're talking about Syria, and I posted so many, like on my, I only have Facebook account. I don't have any other accounts, but I posted a lot about Syria. And before they went into Damascus, I talked about how I was born in the UAE. I was born in the United Arab, UAR, United Arab Republic, UAE. No, I was not born in the UAE. UAR, that's United Arab Republic. That's the name for the union between Syria and Egypt. Egypt kept to that name for 10 years after the separation. So when I was born, my birth certificate still had the United Arab Republic. That's the union between Egypt and Syria. So whether it's Syria or Egypt, Muslims and Christians liberated their lands from the British or the French or whatever European colonialists. And so now we have a new social contract. And based on the new social contract, the imam has the right, basically, even, during those times, the imam has the right to drop the jizya. Whatever terms they agree on. So we have lands that were conquered by force and lands that were opened by treaties. That treaty, whatever it is that the imam agrees on with the people of that land, will be binding. So if the imam agrees that there will always be church, they always have the right to build churches and so on and so forth, then whatever it is they agreed on will be binding. In Islam we have, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu awfu bil uqud. O you who believed, fulfill your contracts. So we never violate, we never breach our contracts. So now, we have a new social contract after the liberation of our countries. That new social contract between us and the minorities, the non-Muslim minorities in Muslim lands, we have agreed on equal rights. Equal rights. That's it. We will commit.
There is a commitment.
We will commit to that. Equal rights.
Well, so many of these visions that we have of what an Islamic government or Khilafah would look like, many of the aspects of an Islamic government that we once believed were hard and fast actually do have the leeway, from what you're saying, to be moved around, to be navigated by the people in charge.
Yes, of course. Like during certain periods in our history, and in certain areas, keep in mind, let's not generalize. It's important not to generalize, but during certain periods and in certain areas, non-Muslims needed to distinguish themselves in their attire. Now, did the Prophet ﷺ ask them to distinguish themselves? Do we have anything on record that the Prophet ﷺ had asked them to distinguish them in their attire? No, we don't. So is it binding on us? Would we be saying to the Christians in Egypt, you can't wear, like you will have to basically wear like a sign or something? No, you don't. Did the Prophet say that? Did the Prophet demand that? No, he did not. So if you just want to go back to like to set your clock back to the time of al-Mutawakkil, good luck. Well, I don't have to listen to you. So I want to sit back to the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
MashaAllah. Just a last question on this, because this can be very deep and we can like literally commit the whole podcast just to this topic. But just for a last question on this topic, in light of what's taking place in Bangladesh, what happened in Afghanistan, and obviously what's happening now in Syria, is there a scope for some form of a united force of Muslims to like bring a re-emergence of, you know, a Khilafah system amongst multinational entities?
Okay, so the word Khilafah itself, did this word come in the Quran? Yeah, well,
Yeah.
But not in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the sense of
yeah.
like a model of governance. Mm-hmm. Did it come in the speech of the Prophet? The Prophet talked about Khulafa, but in the linguistic sense. Mm-hmm. Umar bin Khattab was looking for a name, for a title for this position, and they said to him, Khalifa. He said, Abu Bakr was the Khalifa of the Prophet ﷺ. If I say Khalifat Rasulullah, Yatul, Amir al-Mu'mineen, we are the believers, you are the leader, you are Amir al-Mu'mineen. Okay, so the idea here is substance, not form, is what we're after. Cooperation among Muslims, unity among Muslims is not something negotiable. Yes, of course, it's desirable. Mm-hmm. Yes, and not only desirable, but also feasible. Mm-hmm. But what form of unity? What is that unity? Mm-hmm. And, so I always say that I like the name Organization of Islamic Cooperation because it takes, it used to be the Organization of Islamic Conference, mm-hmm. and they changed it to Organization of Islamic Cooperation. And I like cooperation more than conference because cooperation comes right out of the Quran. Mm-hmm. So this is our rock is the Quran. So if it comes out of the Quran, then it will have profound meanings and like power and energy to mobilize us towards unity. But now, what do we mean by that unity? And how can we achieve more unity? Does it have to be like, of course, no matter what happens in the future, it has to be decentralized. Mm-hmm. You can't have someone in Baghdad, like ruling from Jakarta to Casablanca. Yeah. It has to be decentralized. And historically speaking, it was decentralized. Mm-hmm. It was pretty symbolic. Mm-hmm. The person in Baghdad was pretty symbolic. So it was decentralized. So what kind of unity? Maybe we can develop the OIC to a point where we can realize more unity through the OIC. But certainly that is a direction that we should be working towards. So someone was talking about, unified currency. Beautiful, great. But if you have countries with a per capita GDP of $140,000 and Muslim countries with a per capita GDP with $2,000, would it not take you time mm-hmm. to be able to have like
unified currency?
Yeah. Unified currency. So if you're talking about like one passport for everyone. So if I'm Egyptian, so let me use sort of my Egyptianness. If you were to give me like a Qatari or like an Emirati passport growing up, you have 100 million people in Egypt. Give us a unified passport and you will see huge movements. Migrations, like mass migrations. And so just we will have to be realistic. Mm-hmm. We will have to also not be obsessed with sort of forms and like titles but look for the substance, work for unity, Muslim cooperation, Muslim coordination, all of that integration of the different aspects. Like, why don't we work on trade agreements mm-hmm. between Muslim countries? Why don't we boost trade between Muslim countries? Why don't people who have similar economic and cultural backgrounds try to have some more unity among themselves? Why can't the Gulf countries have a little bit more unity among themselves? Why can't North Africa, from Libya to Morocco, the borders between Morocco and Algeria,
It's the most contentious issue right now between Morocco and Algeria. Yeah.
Why can't we have unity? These are nations that have comparable culture, economically also. There is some economic parity between them. So work gradually, have a realistic, practical approach towards achieving that goal that we all aspire for. But work gradually and be realistic.
Very important, I guess, very, very pertinent words and very pertinent advice. Moving towards the West, when it comes to Muslims living in the West, we've done some studies and we found out that there's approximately 60 million Muslims living in the West when you consider Europe, the Americas, and of course Australia, where we are here right now. How incumbent is it upon Muslims living in the West, given that we're not going anywhere, how incumbent is it upon us to develop our own unique Muslim identity in this context?
Yeah, so look at Islam in China, look at Islam in Indonesia, look at Islam in Sub-Saharan Africa, look at Islam in the Gulf, look at Islam in Turkey, look at Islam in Bosnia. Do you see distinct Islamic cultures in
Yes.
these? You see. So what's why would it be too shocking for Muslims in the West to develop their own Islamic culture? So certainly the constants of Islam are not cannot be compromised. So there are Islamic constants, there are thawabit, and there are mutaghayyirat. There are circumstantial variables, but there are objectives, Islamic, the objectives. There are the principles, the overarching principles that we all have to live by, and never compromise. But certainly, Islam manifested itself in different ways, and from a culture perspective, manifested itself in different ways in different cultures, and did not demand all peoples of different backgrounds and different cultures into a melting pot. There was a melting pot to some extent, but separate between, so when people traveled across the land, the idea that our salah has to be in Arabic, we have to pray in Arabic, that is conducive to that sense of unity among people of this ummah. So even though you may travel across the lands and you may see different types of art and the different structures, different architecture, but you will go to the masjid, which usually was at the center of the city, and you will be able to say wudu, and someone will point to the place where you can make wudu. You will be able to come in and everything is familiar. So you feel that like Ibn Battuta when he left Morocco, so crossing all these lands, different cultures, different languages, but I am quite sure he felt, at home to some extent, because all it takes is to go to the center of the town, go to the masjid where the adhan is being called, you understand the adhan, you walk in, you can communicate like a few words, that you can communicate with everybody, wudu and salah and this and that. And then you will pray behind the imam. You will understand what the imam says. And, that brings about, that sense of unity and that comfort and so on and so forth. So yes, of course, we're part of this ummah. We will continue to be part of this ummah. And there is no problem reconciling, because keep in mind, and I talk about this a lot, there is faith through association, faith through persuasion, and faith through experience. We although we do not decry or deny any one of them, but ultimately you want to grow up in your faith from simply faith through association to faith through experience, and that's when you taste the sweetness of faith. So identitarian religiosity can be toxic if, we're not denying our Islamic identity, but identitarian religiosity can be toxic. People, religion is to earn the pleasure of God. is, to improve you spiritually and morally in every sense. People who are not stuck in identitarian religiosity, faith through association, will be able to navigate, that particular issue or that particular dilemma and reconcile between their allegiance to the Ummah, loyalty to the Ummah, and their national belonging. And it's not going to be new, because we've had, instances in the past where Muslims lived as minorities, and they were able to reconcile between these different types of belonging. I do belong to this ummah. I do belong to this country.
No. I love how you categorized it into three distinct categories. Faith through identification is perhaps the lowest form of faith.
Yeah, yes.
And I've seen how fragile that is firsthand when you just look at the sheer amount of people that associate to themselves through their identification to Islam. They fall, like so many have fallen. We see so many like Instagram influencers that garnered these huge followings just of, solely associating themselves with Islam as a Muslim, and then just completely fall off because there was nothing to the essence of their faith apart from the fact that, hey, I identify as a Muslim. And it's just so fragile. Very, very powerful. On this point, how can we preserve our Muslim identity and our faith in the face of like a huge push of Americana culture or these strong cultures in the face of our Islamic culture and our Islamic identity? What's the best way to preserve our faith and our identity? And is there a scope for differentiating ourselves, like to avoid the tashabbuh and resembling the culture of others?
Yeah, of course. Like, I like to go back whenever I get asked like a difficult question. I like to think within the paradigm of al-ikhlas wal-mutaba'ah, sincerity and adherence, compliance, adherence to the Prophet's way, compliance with the Prophet's way. I guess this is the right answer to every difficult question. We will have to be, we will have to be sincere. You will be defeated. Identitarian religiosity will be defeated because identitarian religiosity is not about the spirit. It's not spiritual. It's not moral. It's not even intellectual. It's not based on intellectual conviction, like strong intellectual conviction. So that will be defeated. And if you're not stuck there, you will be able to resist because you will, after tasting, didn't Qaisar ask Abu Sufyan if people leave the deen of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? And then Abu Sufyan told him, no one leaves it. And he said, likewise is Iman, when its sweetness mixes, enters the heart. So if the sweetness of Iman, if you have this experiential faith and you experience the beauty, you're convinced of your deen, and you have experienced the sweetness of your deen, you will never basically, you will never be defeated. You will never melt away. You will always be a Muslim and a proud Muslim. But what do we mean by a proud Muslim? Does it necessarily mean wearing this thing? Is that what Islam is about? Of course not. It is about having, that great aqidah, that great worldview that gives us anchorage, that gives us meaning, that gives us purpose, and the great teachings. So Imam Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said it's all about al-ikhlas lil-haq wa rahmat al-khalq. So the deen is all about al-ikhlas lil-haq wa rahmat al-khalq. To have sincerity, devotion to the real, al-haq, the real, Allah, and mercy towards His creation, And if that is the Islam that we're after, then that is undefeated. That is, you can't defeat that. If we truly internalize that we are about devotion to the one true God, the real, and we're here as a mercy to humanity. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. We have not sent you but as a mercy to the worlds. Then that will not be defeated. And then, so we need some effort to basically to build our institutions. And I was talking, I'm here in Australia, of course, OnePath. So I was talking to the brothers about the importance of endowments. The importance, we have to have strong endowments. Endowments were integral to, our Islamic civilization.
Or waqf system.
Waqf system, to the prosperity and sustainability of our institutions. And then we build different institutions that will cater to the different needs of the community so that they're comfortable with their Islam and all their needs are basically fulfilled through their community without isolating themselves from the larger society. Because you have to have, there has to be, one of the British Muslim thinkers said that Islam basically is meant to be a witness and a refuge. A witness, like a lighthouse guiding to people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those who will choose to come, who will choose to accept it, it will be a refuge for them. So we will have to work on both aspects, to be a witness, to be able to give da'wah, and that da'wah through conduct, and da'wah also through speech, and to provide refuge for the people who will accept it, whether they are born Muslims or they are converts. We have to have, we will have to have an accommodating community that will fulfill all the needs that they need, all human needs, including the need for belonging. If you look at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, belonging is important. So when I talk about identitarian religiosity, I am not bashing,
dismissing it completely.
I'm not dismissing it completely. I'm just saying that, we need to grow beyond this. If this is the beginning, children at 5 years of age, they're probably Muslims through association, but as you grow up, you need to go beyond it. But we need to cater to this need and various needs that our community has.
SubhanAllah, I guess that's so powerful. I think there's a lot to unpack there. Even the whole financial stability of the Muslim community is something which needs a lot of focus and attention towards right now, especially when we're living in the West. We're at the mercy of our employers. We're at the mercy of the government. At any minute, they can shut down institutions if we are not independent financially. So I think that's very important. As a jurist in the West, in America, what has that role been like, given, I guess, the diverse madhahib that are being followed, the diverse schools of thought that are being followed, the diverse mashayikh that are around in America? How have you been able to navigate that role, given the diversity of opinion and diversity of schools of thought?
Well, I believe jurists are the most suited to navigate the differences. Theologians have a little bit harder time, navigating differences. Philosophers even have a little bit, but fiqh, as the Assembly of Muslim Jurists in America, we have people of different backgrounds, the people who come from different madhahib, people who subscribe to different theological orientations. Fiqh is able to do this, and this is not, out of bias or anything, but even traditionally, historically, our fiqh disagreements did not result in as much, contention and hostility among us like other types of disagreement. So fiqh is capable of doing this, and navigating the differences. I think that we have to be, we need education, because that is a sa'. So someone came to Imam Ahmad and said that he wrote a book on khilaf, and he said, call it a sa', or, spaciousness, or, so the idea here is we need to have, we need to be more educated. You need to be able to sort out what is certain or definitive and what's speculative. You need to sort out what is a matter of agreement and what is a matter of disagreement. Having that, which is not easy, by the way, it requires a lot of effort, and it will require a lot of patience until our dua have that tamakkun in their fiqh. So you need to have the knowledge, and then, of course, you need to have the sincerity, because knowledge without that sincerity and, wanting the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be of a great benefit. But what we can do is to spread the knowledge of the deen. And when we give fatwa, I have always done that, or almost always done that. Like, I try to tell people, and even when sometimes just in the past couple of days, people were asking me certain questions about abortion, for instance, and they may sometimes feel overwhelmed because I give them a lot of too much information. I try to tell them that there is a disagreement. This is what I espouse or support or uphold, maybe, because who am I to support anything? This is what I uphold, but this is the spectrum of disagreement. And I think that this will be key to addressing our disagreements. If you acknowledge that this is a matter of disagreement, and whatever it is that I uphold is what I uphold, and it is not my say, is not the final say, it will continue to be a matter of disagreement. But here is what I think. And you don't need to shy away from saying this. You do not need to shy away from saying this. Disagree and love. I said that all of our issues, even theologically, I wrote a book on the divine attributes, and I said 2 things we need to do. Measured exposure and disagree and love. Measured exposure is you don't need to expose people to more than they need to learn. So the intricacies of Aqidah. This is not something that you need to teach after Salat al-Maghrib at your local masjid. Maybe students of knowledge, advanced students of knowledge will need to have that exposure, but this is not something. So measured exposure is important, and then disagree and love. So we can be passionate about the things we believe in, but we still have to balance, the two. The kalimat al-tawheed, tawheed al-kalima. So the kalimat al-tawheed, the word of unity, the unity of God, the oneness of God, and tawheed al-kalima, the unity of the ummah.
So we've spoken about the unity of the ummah and unity of our discussions, inshallah. Obviously, unity is something we can always strive towards, but it's something which is not guaranteed. On the topic of this, there's currently been a lot of, infighting between the intra-Muslim circles of Aqidah. People between the Sufi spectrum, the Salafi spectrum, people of the Ghazalian school, people of the Taymiyan school, the Ash'ari school, the Athari school. In your opinion, and perhaps as someone who's perhaps the most read person on Ibn Taymiyyah, who is, someone that many schools would ascribe towards on one side of the spectrum, how can we achieve unity, or at least quell the toxic disunity and infighting that we are currently seeing right now?
So I would go back to the measured exposure and the disagree and love. So measured exposure is important. We don't need to expose people like the polemics, the idea of polemics. Polemics have been vital to the sort of the health of our discourse. I would say that orthodoxy has been defined through disagreement more than it has been defined through agreement. Because when you disagree, when people of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, that's the people of Sunnah and the people of Jama'ah, if Ibn Abbas is the first one, radiallahu anhu, to craft or to coin that expression, then he was talking about the credibility of the Sahaba as being that Jama'ah. They are with the Jama'ah of the Sahaba, and they accepted the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and that title can accommodate us all. People who accept the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ and believe in the credibility of the generation of the Sahaba, and they value and respect the generation of the Sahaba, the title can accommodate us all. So measured exposure means that you will expose the people to that which they need to know. So, like I said, after Salat al-Maghrib in the masjid, you don't need to be talking about the intricacies of Aqidah. And to be honest with you, most of the Aqidah that we teach is apologetics, not Aqidah. It's not Aqidah to begin with. These are guidelines to protect people, but this is they're not the sort of the moving force that will make people want Allah, that will want people desire Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and want the nearness to Allah and so on. So we have to be careful, and we have to give the people what they need the most, particularly on social media. So polemics on social media, for instance, I think that there's so much that the people need that we're not given to them, and we're giving them things they may need the least or not need at all. That may be sometimes counterproductive. So when we talk about the polemics that happened among our great scholars, yes, they did refute each other's narratives or takes on different matters, whether it's Aqidah or Fiqh or other matters, but particularly when the disagreements involved Aqidah, they were a little bit more contentious. But these scholars they provided like an alternative grand narrative. So, these were not Facebook posts that are mainly sort of personal attacks, not objective. Mostly not objective, but rather personal attacks. These are people who who offered an alternative grand narrative. So they wrote volumes of books, and they did not expose the masses. They did not expose the masses to those disagreements. Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, Taqiyuddin, Abu al-Abbas, rahimahullah, did not expose the masses, and he said that the masses should not be exposed to these intricacies. And he said, I have never exposed the masses, and anyone who said that I talked about these issues in front of the masses is not telling the truth about me. And he said that the masses, what they are required to uphold is jumal, not tafasil, when it comes to Aqidah, meaning basically the principles of Aqidah, and not the detailed discourse, but rather the principles of Aqidah, the generalities, the general principles of Aqidah. That is what the masses need, not the detailed discussions. And he said the detailed discussions that will bring about fitna and fighting. The masses should not be exposed to those detailed discussions, and they should be among the scholars. The issue here is, when they wrote those books, do you think that they wrote those books for, most of the people didn't even read, So like when you write 3 volumes on the Asma and Sifat, do you think the average person in the masjid will be reading the 3 volumes on Asma and Sifat? Of course not. But certainly, like, social media posts will go to people that don't really understand the discussions, and when they don't understand the depth of these discussions, they can cause fitna to them. حدثوا الناس بما يعرفون خاطبوا الناس على قدر عقولهم. Speak to people in a way they can comprehend and they can understand. Otherwise, it becomes a fitna for them. So this is important. Measured exposure is important. And then be objective. Objectivity is important. If you are a scholar, if you are a scholar, because premature involvement in politics, in polemics, and in politics too, but premature involvement in politics and polemics, and disproportionate involvement of polemics are indicative of a problem. Like you have a problem, So qualified people may become involved in polemics to some degree, objective polemics, but also, on a personal level. So Imam Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, on a personal level, was he not very respectful of people like Shamsuddin al-Asbahani, for instance, extremely respectful?
Or Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari.
Even Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, but this Shamsuddin al-Asbahani was a contemporary of him, a little bit older, but he used to be very respectful of him. He used to be very respectful of the Daqiq al-Eid. He would even, say, like when Shamsuddin al-Asbahani would talk, he would say to people, quiet, stay silent, let us benefit from the Shaykh. Who's he? He is like, he is certainly like a great Ash'ari scholar, like, and committed to Ash'arism. It's not like, because many of the scholars, honestly speaking, do not subscribe to a particular theological orientation, but many of the fuqaha did not really subscribe. But this is someone who was, determinedly Ash'ari. He was, and then even people even Ibn Makhluf, rahimahullah, al-Bakri, these are people that Ibn Taymiyyah, rahimahullah, had, like confrontations with them. But Ibn Makhluf said, I have not seen anyone who's more chivalrous than Ibn Taymiyyah. ما رأيت أفتى من Ibn Taymiyyah. We've tried to harm him in every possible way, and when he was capable of avenging himself, he forgave us. Al-Bakri, they say that Al-Bakri had to hide in Ibn Taymiyyah's home, despite the fact of being most hostile to him. So on a personal level, on their objective polemics, whatever polemics they were involved in, and this did not mean that on a personal level these were hostile to each other when they saw each other. So Imam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah says that he came one day to basically tell Imam Taqi ad-Din that one of his most hostile opponents, who showed a lot of animosity to him, had died, and he felt that he was be basically sharing good news with him. And he said that he rebuked me, he reprimanded me, he was very angry with me. He went out right away to his family and said, I will be to you like he was, and anything that you need, please reach out, things of that nature. So the people who are involved in polemics nowadays, are they doing that?
No.
Will they be able to go out to the same masjid and have a friendly sort of discussion, or show like good manners and good behavior? These scholars of ours have, yes, they have refuted each other. Yes, they have written polemics against each other, but they ate together, they fought together, they lived together, and they were buried together. So that's what we should do. When we are qualified enough, when we are qualified to engage in polemics, when we are qualified enough to engage in polemics. And then also you have to understand what the people need, the needs of the time. So when you have statistics indicating that 22% of the first generation Muslims leave Islam, first generation Muslims in the US, 22%, left Islam or leave Islam. Isn't that more concerning?
Yes.
Shouldn't that basically recruit more of your energy to address that particular problem?
That's very true. I guess, and the problem is exacerbated when algorithms start to reward such behavior. I would argue that many of the people that are, finding entertainment in these hostile back and forths, they probably don't even know what the word Ash'ari means, what the word Athari means. A lot of the Ummah probably doesn't even know what the intricacies of these terms really mean, yet we're just watching it for some entertainment value. And a lot of the people that are involved in it are unfortunately not qualified, as you mentioned, to be involved in it. You've mentioned a very, striking statistic: 22% of Muslims, first generation living in the West, would end up leaving Islam. As a last question, as someone who's a pediatrician who gives prescriptions, can you give a prescription to Muslims living in the West right now? What are 5 things we should put our energy towards if we want to see the preservation of our religion moving into the future? 5 things. Perhaps it was going to be on a prescription, literally, and we'll hand it out.
Well, so the 5 things will it's hard to figure this out on the spot, but I didn't think of 5 things, but like I said, I have always thought that large endowments are important, and building our institutions are important on a communal level, certainly on a personal level. Sincerity and learning about your deen and trying to reform yourself and trying to take care of your family and go out in sort of circles from yourself, your family, your community, and so on. But on a communal level, I think that we need to have strong endowments. We need to have strong institutions. We need to have dua, that are qualified, that are cognizant of the reality, but also well versed in the tradition. They're well versed in tradition, sincere, loyal to the tradition, but cognizant of the reality. And this is an issue that I heard that in Australia, Islamic schools are funded. That's great, But for the majority, so for the majority of Western Muslims, they need to work on schooling. They need to work on building Islamic schools, or maybe finding alternative ideas if it is too financially costly or unbearable for the community to have Islamic schools. Maybe have creative ideas, figure out how to homeschool and to provide options for homeschooled kids. So endowments, institutions, dua, qualified dua, Islamic schools that are Islamic schools, or schooling in general. The ability to, and providing the social networks that will keep people in and keep people feel connected. Addressing the social needs of the community members, whether they are born Muslims or they are converts.
Wow. A prescription of 5 things I think will be very beneficial for all the Muslims moving forward. Shaykh Hatem Al Haj, Doctor, it's been an absolute privilege and an honor to have you join us Join us on the OnePath Network podcast for your first time in Sydney, Australia. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Jazakallah khair, barakallah feekum. May Allah bless you, bless your efforts, and may Allah use us all in serving His good cause.
Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.